reminded that, as we transition into our next panel, I'm reminded that a few years ago, everyone was talking about three acronyms: UPI, GEO, and GST. Manish hit on this earlier, talking about it being a really important seed that has been planted. As an EdTech investor, I would say it would not be an EdTech conference if we didn't talk about ChatGPT and NEP. So, as we transition to our next panel, the Indian government's NEP has obviously been a hot topic since its release. It sets out a plan to achieve GER goal of 50%, materially expands online education, and makes education more skills-oriented. In this panel, leaders with expertise in regulation, law, impact, and government will demystify NEP, as well as explain what changes are coming. So with that, and I believe we are ready, please welcome to the stage Kavish, Gadia, Anirudha, Dutta, Lakshmi, Goyal, Nishith, Desai, and Shankar, Maruwada.
Happy afternoon, everyone. I've been told not to miss a second. It's everything very power-packed, and I've been also told that I don't need to worry about time. Somebody's controlling time as well, so we can be free-flowing. It's a super privilege to be with this panel, as in each of these people, I can have a 2-hour conversation just on NEP. Let's see how much we can get out of them in just 34 minutes. So I remember when the pandemic just started, I also run a school, and we were wondering how do we continue learning, and digital learning became a necessity within a quarter of the pandemic starting. And today, across yesterday and today, we have been talking about post-pandemic, what are the permanent changes in education? And I think one of the things that has been accepted, agreed, is the role of EdTech, technology, innovation in education. But something that happened during pandemic, which went completely unnoticed, is what we are going to dive deep into, NEP 2020, the new education policy. And before I bring in my panelist friends here, some trivia and important facts. The earlier policy document before NEP 2020 had come in the decade I was born. So maybe after this conversation, we can see how many of you get that answer right. And subsequently, the country kept on building on that policy. And second, whenever I meet somebody who's keen in having a conversation on NEP policy, my first question to them is, how large is the document? Most of them will say 70 pages. But actually, that's the abridged version of NEP policy, right? NEP is to 430 pages. And third, it's still called the draft NEP policy, right? Because it came during pandemic, and we just didn't have time to talk about implementation. So with no further time on setting the context on the reality of NEP, let me just jump in straight, and I would love to begin with Shankar. Just quick, Shankar is the CEO and co-founder at EkStep. What's interesting, Shankar, is your work at the cusp of societal change, inclusive education, and NEP has been very, very critically covering the foundational literacy and numeracy piece, right? And the work that EkStep has been doing even before NEP was conceived has been at the cusp of that. So three intersection I see whenever I think of Shankar and EkStep is inclusive education, foundational literacy and numeracy, and technology. So I would love to hear from you, how do you see technology and the intersection of it with foundational literacy and numeracy being effective with the NEP 2020 now?
Thank you, Kavish. Maybe I'll illustrate with an incident from yesterday. Yesterday, the Education Minister of India launched a magic box for foundational literacy and learning, which is nothing but literally a box which has a whole lot of books and toys and flashcards and posters and games and puzzles. This came out of the recommendation of the National Curriculum Framework for Foundation stage, October 2022, which in turn came from NEP. What was important was to signal that at the foundation stage, it's not just about books. The main pedagogy is play, which is what the policy talks about. And yesterday was just an illustration of that. At the same time, while the physical box was launched, a digital mirror of it was also launched that included content for children with disabilities, that included content in 13 languages translated with the help of technology. So as you look at policy, it's important to see the string of pearls, right from NEP 2022, where we are now and in subsequent. And when you're looking at technology, one has to look at it in the context of how it enables implementation of policy. And that's why I'm really excited by the next few years as to how this policy will be implemented and how it has the potential to transform Indian education. Our focus is on the early years, foundational, but I think by 2030, we'll see the real impact of this. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-on, Shankar, here. When we look at technology, the world is really having very high expectation with the kind of revolution finance has brought in India in technology. And I think we can be at the cusp of EdTech revolution also for the world. What do you think would be one big piece that we can expect coming out as a gift to the world from EdTech technology?
Actually, that's already happening. The way India is going about solving for technology in education is not build mammoth solutions, but build digital building blocks, build digital public infrastructure. You must have heard Nandan talk. So I see three parts of the puzzle. One is policy. Second is technology as digital public infrastructure, on top of which innovation comes. And third, therefore, is innovation. So India's gift to the world is already these technologies, which are provided as open source goods. Diksha is now provided by the government of India as open source. And Diksha, in turn, is built on Sunbird, which EkStep incubated. So this new way of thinking about technology, where it is human-centered technology, where it's about how does technology fit into society, I think that would be India's gift to the world.
Superb. It actually would love to come to Lakshmi next. One of the things that we were suffering or thinking through the pandemic was how technology would be adopted across different schools, right? And in the previous discussion, Manish mentioned that just 45% children are going to government schools. And I think that number has been coming down significantly over the last couple of decades. And CCS, Lakshmi is the CEO at CCS, a policy think tank. And I think one of the incredible work that CCS has been bringing forward is around school choice, right? Across government school, the expensive private schools, as well as, I think, the budget private schools where you have given significant work. Two parts here. One, how do you see NEP kind of supporting or helping each of these three category of schools? And second is with respect to the pandemic, I think the budget private schools were the ones who suffered the most through pandemic. And how do you see that changing in light of the NEP now?
Sure. Thanks, Kavish. I think just a couple of sentences on school choice, because I do believe that that's not fully appreciated as a concept. So school choice is not just about lending agency to the parent to choose a school in the capacity of an individual who should be in charge of his or her ward's future. It's far more than that. In fact, there's enough evidence that suggests that competition actually improves the overall quality of learning outcomes. This is a Clive Belfield study. Also, Thapa in 2011 has very clearly established that competition in private school players actually improves the quality of learning in government schools. I think the third bit on school choice is connected to the right to education, a very, very noble act that was passed, but is perhaps not fully understood in terms of what the import was. Public funding or government funding of school education for all does not mean the need for the public or the government to run all schools. I think there's a big difference between who executes the idea of right to education and who funds it. So that's basically on school choice. I'll just quickly cover off the NEP aspect of it that you spoke about. Now, I think NEP is very clear in terms of need for moving to outcome-based learning as against input-focused, and that's really noble. What is perhaps not adequately covered in NEP 2020 is the presence of 145 state acts, 101 related state rules, innumerable rulings, all of which actually work with each other and contradict quite a few of them, thus resulting in scope for a lot of red tapeism. So if we are talking about, and this is a conference on innovation, I would really say that permissionless innovation is what you need. And that is something that NEP 2020 at this point in time has not really managed to lend, and therefore school choice is definitely hampered. As we go through the rest of the panel, we could cover off the other points, but I'll stop for now.
Well, thank you for that. In fact, that feels me that we should bring in Nishith Bhai here. And Nishith Bhai, I don't think we need much of introduction. If NEP policy is 430 pages, I'm sure he's already ready with the NEP 2030, which is as voluminous but simpler. So Nishith Bhai, I want to just take it head on what Lakshmi just mentioned, that even after such 35, 40 years post which we have got this new policy document for us, why is it still not making it easy for innovation and educators to come into the sector? Why this red tapeism and so many guidelines? Do you see anything changing here on in this direction?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me here. And today's subject for this afternoon is innovation through regulations. What is innovation? The way in which I would define innovation is finding solution to a complex problem through an unprecedented mechanism. Again, there could be 100 different definitions, but this is my simple definition. So most important thing, what is the problem we are trying to solve? When I look at 426 pages, it's more like essay than a policy statement, with respect. A lot of motherhood statements, very good. Everything has been attempted to be covered. Most important sentence in the whole policy is that we should prioritize. I'm not sure some of you read that policy, but it says we should prioritize. What has not been done even after 2 years is list of priorities. Because you cannot do everything at one go. Out of that, you figure out what are the most important things, slightly medium, less important, something like in negotiation, give away. Because these are low priority. So prioritization is the first game that we need to play. Second, regulations can be strangulations, and sometimes they are very good enablers. So most of the policy statements should have dual role regulator, what is called development and regulation. Look at insurance regulatory and development authority, okay? So there are many such instances. So it's very important that while regulating, you cannot just strangulate the whole purpose for which the policy is framed. So when I see the whole drafting of the policy has been, I would say it's nice, but I think something that does not solve a problem, okay? And we have to very quickly prioritize. 2 years have gone by, simply prioritization we have not been able to do, which is something surprising. Third, as a law firm, we are a research-based law firm. We spend almost 40% of our time on research, academics, thought leadership, and stuff like that. What we typically do is to do trend assessment and forecasting going forward 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And look at what are new things that are going to happen. Because you will always be in a catch-up game if you're going to, correct this and correct that, etc. You've got to have a duality of, understanding that one, of course, you look at the past and the present and you try to take corrective steps, but you have to be in sync with what is going to happen, okay? So a policy regulation needs to take into account those kind of things. Technological changes are definitely one of the things. But beyond that, what is our vision? That it all starts with vision, right? And simple vision is to provide access to education or an affordable exit. Now again, you have to understand each of the words very carefully. Affordability is just not whether it is expensive or it is not expensive. Affordability is how do you make it possible for somebody to get it. So you can have financial models, for example, to or student loans, okay, and many other kind of things that can be done. So again, there's been little less emphasis on affordability. What is conveyed generally is that it should be cheap. Whereas what we should say is that no, everyone gets whatever is the price of the best education. Okay. So one is vision for India, because you've got a lot of need for education in India, but you cannot think in isolation with outside world. India has done an excellent job in software industry. Why not in education? Entire Africa, many other countries are available for India to export talent, and that's where, you can create models which are somewhat similar to. It's huge. India has one resource called population, which can be produced in factories, So, but that's a very big strength, and it's going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. China, I'm told, will become 770 million people in the next 50, 100 years or something like that. India is going to double the population. But how will you employ them? How will you do that? I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit too long for this afternoon. But I personally think, in previous sessions, some reference was made to services sector. India is really cut off a services sector. Manufacturing will take 5, 10, 15 years. It's not easy. Our ecosystem, everything is there. But education is one sector where you can do marvelous job on a global basis. I had one gentleman in Silicon Valley, is most well known if some of you are known. He went at the age of about 80 to US, and he became guru for teaching mathematics. He became, every child he taught. If you see in Palo Alto, his name, we call him Hari Dada, But there is so much talent, even at any age, you can do that, So I believe that we need to be really innovative. Technologies, of course, is the greatest, I would say, leveler and social equalizer. So I think we should use that from every perspective so that people can get access to education, and then at the same time becomes affordable. One small thing I'll point out, because I may not have another time to talk, is that tax is a big nightmare in India. At one point of time, we had tax terrorism. Currently, it's becoming tax imperialism. Okay. But fortunately, between US and India, we have very good tax treaty, under which certain payments for education are not taxable. Okay. But what I'm trying to say, if you want to expand your universities outside India, exchange control regulations have been liberalized. Policy says you can do it, but when it comes to tax, it can lose exemption. Because only if India is interested on an international level in that particular facility, then only exemption is available. So the tax again is a little bit of an issue. We create regulations which basically make you manipulate the system. For example, you must have not-for-profit schools, right? So what do? You set a management company. You set a management company, extract all the profit out of it. Correct? We all know that, right? Whole country knows about it. But why do you want to do that? So anyway, I won't go on and on. I'm sorry, I'm talking a bit too much. Today is free, though. As a lawyer, I don't talk without fees. But
No,
I'll stop here for a moment.
No, I think, thank you for that, as in you covered some of the things that I would have come to eventually anyways, because these are very important elements of a policy. And if it's vague, and if you perceive it like an essay and not like a policy document, that's a bold statement. And I'm going to come back on the prioritization piece by the end of the panel. Let's bring in an outside-in voice from Anirudha, who's right now heading the India piece for Capital Group. And I think, Anirudha, one of the interesting things was we came across you talking about India in one of your recent articles about how you are so positive on India. And Nishith Bhai just talked about how he's comparing India policy to outside. Let's bring in that outside in view. In this article, you did highlight talked about the demographic advantage that we are sitting at, right? As in the student and the demographic advantage. How do you see NEP policy with respect to some of the global changes you have seen across the world? How does it fare on that?
Yeah,
Thank you very much. So let me just take a step back. So why am I positive? Demographic dividend, obviously everyone talks about it, but we still don't know whether it's a disaster or a dividend, right? We are at that cusp, and we are already halfway through that, or maybe a quarter of a way through that dividend. And if we don't realize it over the next maybe a couple of decades or so, then it could well be a disaster. So it goes beyond that. You know, the first reason, the second reason why I'm positive is what Nandan earlier said and what Shankar said, that we have started building this open source digital platforms at population scale, right? It's really changing lives for people. And it's changing lives at the bottom of the pyramid. It's changing for us as well. And if I could just, Nandan mentioned about COVIN, the QR code certificate that we had for our COVID vaccines. Now, it enabled me to travel through Indian airports easily, but where it helped most, like for my driver who went to Uttar Pradesh village, in his village to UP during the lockdown, he got his first vaccine out there, right? And then it opened up. While he was being paid, he wanted to come back and work. He came back to Bombay, and his second vaccine he took in Bombay. And this kind of transportation of the vaccine certificate that was possible, he didn't have to go and stand in queue somewhere trying to convince someone that he had taken his first vaccine, where he had taken it, what was the brand of the vaccine he had taken, none of it. And look, and he's not a very educated guy, so it was not that he was able to go to, and that's the second point what is very encouraging about India. He didn't have a smartphone where he could log in and register himself for the second dosage of vaccine. I offered him, he said, "Nahi sir, hum kar lenge, I'll do it later." So he didn't do it himself as well, I didn't do it for him. He went to the center, there was a facilitator out there, sitting out there, who helped him register and get the vaccine immediately. And this you can see out playing in India again and again. Shankar spoke about Diksha, for example, and I think we did a record number of a few million teachers got trained through Nishith, that same protocol and platform during COVID, when teacher training had to move out of the physical world to online world. And I remember speaking to quite a few teachers and others about how did they navigate this. So there was another teacher of my age, my schoolmate actually, and she teaches in a Kendriya Vidyalaya, which is a government school, and one of the better government schools in Ranchi, right? And she has no exposure to computer. At least I learned excellent Word and limited my education out there. She hadn't reached there as well. And she said, "Oh, my son came home. He used to work he works for Accenture. He was back at home, work from home. And he started teaching her." There was another not-for-profit, I realized, which had pivoted to online teachers training, where teachers from other schools came in and started training teachers from the budget private schools, the public schools, etc., saying, "Hey, can we help you with this? This is how it works. This is how you do your online lessons. This is how you move forward." And this goes on and on. If you go to YouTube today, Gujarat has this thing called Saral platform for evaluating of students, exams, and everything else. You see that there are tutorials on Saral on YouTube. You know, how do you navigate that? How do you use it? So we'll find solutions where the physical world and the technological world comes together, right? And that's the beauty of India, of what we are seeing, having the number of people and everything else. Sorry, the second point why I'm positive is, you know, today we have reached a stage with this whole $3.5 trillion economy wherever we are, where we have a scale in terms of the global, in terms of consumption and demand, which earlier we did not have. We are still a very poor country at $2,400 or $500 per capita income. It has its own set of challenges, but we are today the third largest country in terms of car sales, right? We are far behind the first two. We are the number 2 or 3 third largest country in terms of steel consumption, for example, right? And when this happens, we are crossing this threshold where we are reaching about 5% of global demand, maybe slightly above 5%. There's just that much more attention on India. That, coupled with this whole geopolitical tailwind that we have now, is a reason to be very, very positive. And lastly, I would like to mention what people read often, and you'll see headlines. The best study on Indian school education, and particularly on rural school education, is from Pratham. And everyone is familiar with the ASR study that we have, right? And I was looking at the ASR 2022 study, and the headlines were again of how much of, people can, standard 3 students cannot read standard 2 textbooks. That is appalling, really. I was comparing it to the pre-COVID, and during COVID, when they did the study in 3 states, they could do it through the phone, right? And what is interesting is, what were the headlines in 2020 and 21? How many millions of children are out of school? They will probably never come back to school. And the fact that the learning loss is immense. And sure, the learning loss is there. What ASAR captures in rural India is that on reading, the learning has regressed by about 4 or 5 years. But in numeracy, it's barely regressed. Something has worked out there. But more importantly, the enrollments have actually gone up between 2018 and 2022 of the primary schools, 97% to 98%. So through the COVID, we saw disruption, but post-COVID, we are seeing the students are back in schools. We have got them back in school. Something right must have happened out there. Sure, again, private schools and budget private schools have suffered the most. They lost some students. Therefore, the enrollment in public schools is more. But it's happened. The students are back in classrooms. Now we need to figure out how do we reduce that gap of the learning loss that has happened. And that's where the marriage of technology and the physical teachers, I think, works out very well.
So I'm just going to come back on this question to both Shankar and Anirudha. This is with respect to the spend, right? Where we spend our time and money is where we'll see maximum impact. And if you look at the K-12 spending, two parts to that, and maybe you can choose. One is, how do you see that spend changing in light of the NEP guidelines? And second, we always hear that the deepest impact is possible in the early years, while I don't think if the spending is commensurate to the impact that you can create in different age levels. So how do you look at that, Shankar and then Anirudha?
First, we must realize the high cost of access and barriers that exist in the country, especially for the poor. So a lot of the spend is inefficient spend. Let me give you some example. As Anirudha said, if not for COVID, the driver would have had to spend a lot of money, maybe pay bribes to say that I did indeed get vaccinated. So the poverty premium, the inefficiency premium is a large part of spending. To get content beyond textbooks is not easy. Can digital help in that, especially if provided by the state? To prove that you indeed got a skilling in a certain craft back home, if you've shifted, is not easy. If you do not know English or Hindi, you have to pay a premium for that. So all of these are frictions, and people spend to overcome frictions. So through policy, through technology, through innovation, if we can reduce the frictions, if we can put in place plumbing so that people are spending on what creates value for them and not spending to overcome friction, we will unlock a lot of value in this country, right? And that is what I'm excited about. Otherwise, all EdTech companies put together are fighting for the same sliver, right? There's a massive latent potential of what happens when I can seamlessly access teachers from another country, from another state. I can seamlessly earn a credential in one particular subject, from one particular area, rather than from a school, and it is recognized by the schooling system. What happens when I can communicate in Kannada, other person is communicating in Bengali, and yet we're able to have a conversation and a transaction. So my sense is, if that spending can be to create value rather than to overcome friction, building on the demand potential, we are looking at India becoming the skilling and the learning capital. And we will unleash a massive super cycle of learning, which will last maybe 2 decades.
Yeah. First let me start with we have to break some myths about India, right? And I was listing down a few as I came here. One is that India doesn't spend enough on education. So every time when the budget comes, you'll see the headlines. You will see in every manifesto some political party making a promise or another. We actually end up spending 3.1% of GDP on education. And we don't speak about the outcomes, right? And 3.1% of GDP, with 7 or 8% comes from the central government, and 92% actually comes out of the states. And that's where the focus should be. Because at the end of the day, our states, each of our states are like a country. And we forget that often. We say, oh, India, and I read a report which said Singapore has done this and Hong Kong has done this. We have to be very cautious about citing those examples. We should learn for sure. But let's think about this. Tamil Nadu is the size of UK or a Germany. You go to Uttar Pradesh is the size of Brazil by population. but a Niger as far as per capita GSDP is concerned. And therefore, the solution for Tamil Nadu cannot be the same. The platform can be the same, the tools will be the same, but how you think about it, how you approach will be very different. And that's one. So India spends enough on education, actually. And when you add to that what the families spend, including the poorest of families, and for which there are enough data from the National Sample Survey, etc., and they spend a lot of money, actually. The poor, actually, or the households spend as much as the state spends on education. So actually, we are there at 6% of GDP spend, which some people believe is the magic number, right? The other myth is about there's a severe teacher shortage in India, and the pupil-teacher ratio is very high. If you look at, some of you would have looked at today's Times of India. If you flip the inside page, there's a thing about how many schools are there with one teacher only, right? But nobody speaks about how many schools are there in India which has 10:1 pupil-teacher ratio. And the moment you think of it, and you think about it in micro-geographies, which again technology enables you to do today, you can think of, can we have a more uniform pupil-teacher ratio across a district, across a state? And states like Uttar Pradesh, Haryana have started working on this, right? Transfer the teachers to contiguous districts, or merge certain schools which need not be there. Some of these solutions will not be for a remote hilly area, but there can be areas. And therefore, we need to focus on that hybrid system of what pandemic has told us, right? You need the digital solutions. Along with that, you need the teacher in the classroom. Particularly when you come to the lowest rung, the class primary schools, you cannot have just a pure digital education. It doesn't work, it seems, at least. The child doesn't learn. You need the teacher intervention somewhere, the parental intervention. And focus on the 6 or 10 states that matter. You will have solved 70-80% of the problem. Rest will follow, I think. And coming to NEP, the good thing is there's an emphasis on outcomes. Notwithstanding the length of the document, it talks about that. It speaks about the stresses on the foundation literacy and numeracy, which is very important. Again, an outcome-related thing. And it speaks about that there won't be one single solution for the whole country. It's a federal system we have. The states will have to find their language, other solutions, and the states are very different, as I said. And there's an emphasis on the use of technology, and then it addresses the use of challenge, addresses the needs of challenged children, which we never really focused on in school, other than elite schools. Nobody spoke about ADHD, etc. But quickly pivoting to what you said, the opportunity. I think at the bottom of the pyramid, or the entry, below the top 10-20% layer, there's a huge financial opportunity out here. And I had done some back of the envelope calculations. This opportunity, just in terms of devices and content and your connectivity, could be something like over 5 years, a $65-70 billion opportunity. And I'm not even getting into the test prep and everything else, right, which the elites are paying for, and which is what most of EdTech is actually running after with the evaluations. Sure. There's a huge opportunity. Then the question comes, who funds it? And that we still haven't, that's the elephant in the room, right? Because at the end of the day, while we can ask that the government should up its spend to 6% of GDP, do the governments have a room to do that at the end of the day? With a fiscal deficit, we don't have the room to do that. But point is, we can repurpose the expenditure that is now going, that's on primary school, which is about $80 or $90 billion between the states and the center, even if you keep 10% of it aside.
Sorry, Anirudha, I'm going to interrupt because just for everyone, we have not even got into higher education and vocational skills, right? So NEP is expensive, and we know we are already running out of time. Even within K-12, I have not even touched 50% of the questions I had. So just quickly, I have to wrap up the panel by asking one important question, beginning with Lakshmi. Is always we talk about the gap between the policy and the implementation. And Nishith bhai talked about prioritization. If you were to prioritize something out of the policy, what would that be so that we get to some implementation?
Sure. I think just 5 words: let 1,000 flowers bloom, remove regulatory asymmetry.
Thank you so much. Nishith bhai, quick, I think she has set the role model in terms of how we can check out this panel. How do we make sure there is no gap in policy and implementation?
I think one process we follow, I can only share my experience, I'm not teaching anybody anything, right, is a rule of what is called anticipate, prepare, and deliver.
Thank you.
So you anticipate the future, prepare today, and deliver tomorrow. Otherwise, you will always be in a catch-up game.
Thank you.
I just wanted to take one opportunity about what you talked about, education spend by government, very minuscule. We spend about $15 billion, 17, how many billion dollars we spend on education? in the amount? 15 billion.
The state spends about $90 billion.
50 central year budget.
Central
We
budget
spent 15, 17 billion dollars, I don't know exact number. But we spend $60 billion every year on defense. Is there some way to think 90% of the equipment we buy for defense are never used? It's a bottomless pit. If we spend more on diplomacy, less on defense purchases, we spend more on educated teachers who will go and influence people around the world, okay? We can think more strategically as to how to do budget reallocation so that we are more educated people. And healthcare again is small, because of COVID it went up. So education and health, if you are healthy people, educated people, I think you can fight the world. That's the best defense.
Sure. So just to end, Shankar, what's your quick checkout on implementation? And then we'll close. We may not have time for all of us to chip in.
Yeah. On one side, there's a lot of demand. Anirudha talked about it. On the other side, we have a lot of tech solutions. So I think what is missing is going beyond the glamour of solutions to do the hard work of laying the plumbing, to do the hard work of shifting mindsets on education and converting the essay of NEP into rooting it into the ground realities of the day-to-day habits. So it's a long slog, and I think time will teach us. And as Lakshmi said, the 1,000 flowers that will bloom, 900 of them will wilt and die. But the 100 that will survive in the few states will show us the way forward. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, everyone. I know we couldn't cover all of it. It's not possible in 35 minutes. It's 426 pages. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.